The Conjuring movies are getting worse. With each new movie that is released in the extremely popular horror franchise, the critic and audience reception continues to fall lower and lower. Look at this graph of the average review scores from Metacritic for the last 8 movies. Going from 2013's The Conjuring to 2021's The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It, you can see there is a clear decline. If you don't care what critics say, if you care more about what fellow audience members think of the franchise, well, even then the results are still the same. The user scores on Metacritic show a similar downward trend. If your issue isn't with critics or users, but instead the source, if you instead want to look at another review website like IMDb, the combined reviews still create the same slope. Looking at another site like Rotten Tomatoes, you still see the same results telling the same story. This isn't personal opinion. No matter what source you look at, the data shows a decline over 8 years. On average, critics and audiences are enjoying the movies in the Conjuring verse less and less. This data then leads to a bigger question.
Why? Why?
What has gone wrong? What is causing this decline? Are audiences growing tired of a predictable jumpscare formula? Are they making too many sequels too soon? Are they stretching the concept too thin with too many prequels and spin-offs? Are the movies themselves cursed? Well, to begin to answer the overall question of why, let's first look back at the beginning. Despite being one of the highest grossing horror franchises of all time, the Conjuring universe had relatively humble beginnings. The first Conjuring movie didn't succeed by piggybacking off name recognition like the later sequels have. Back in 2013, seeing the words The Conjuring on a movie poster didn't have the same impact for casual moviegoers that it does now. This wasn't an established franchise. This wasn't a movie starring major A-list actors. It didn't even have an interesting or unique premise. On paper, a family moving into a haunted house and getting possessed is the most basic, run-of-the-mill, forgettable haunted house movie premise that you can have. There was no clear advantage, no obvious reason The Conjuring should have been as successful as it was. The first Conjuring succeeded for one reason and one reason alone. It was an extremely well-made horror movie that audiences connected to and fell in love with. James Wan signed on to direct the film after his success directing Saw and Insidious, and he once again knocked it out of the park. The scare sequences are masterful, and it's clear a great deal of care and attention to detail went into every aspect, from location scouting to production design to casting. Patrick Wilson and Farrah Farmiga are excellent as the two leads. They have a great, undeniable chemistry and natural likability. As well, the jump scare haunted house element works because you care about the family. The movie spends time getting you invested in them first, and due to this, there is a great emotional core. For a horror movie to be impactful on this level, you need audiences to care whether the people running around and screaming live or die. The first Conjuring is a masterclass in horror filmmaking, and there isn't much more I need to say about it. If it wasn't great, there wouldn't be a billion-dollar movie universe built off of its name. After The Conjuring and its surprise smash success, Warner Brothers acted quickly and a year later released the second movie in the franchise, Annabelle. This was the logical next step. Annabelle was on the Conjuring posters. The Conjuring opened with the Warrens investigating the Annabelle doll, and Annabelle was in the finale. It was very clear they were teasing audiences and setting up a future Annabelle movie, much like a popular sitcom character getting their own show. Annabelle is the movie that stops the earlier graphs from having a slow, gradual decline. It fell off a cliff. There was a 50% drop between The Conjuring and the second movie. Critics and fans universally disliked it. Annabelle failed due to a number of reasons. It was extremely boring, it had too bland lead characters, and it didn't have enough effective scares. Too much of the movie is shots of Annabelle sitting on a couch while a book gets knocked off a shelf and the main character screams. Cheap, meaningless, loud jump scares over and over until the credits rolled. Despite this movie underwhelming, audiences were still interested in an Annabelle movie done right. Annabelle still carried name recognition, the doll design still creeped people out, and this bad movie wouldn't be her last opportunity to shine. The next movie was Conjuring 2 in 2016. This movie needed to get the Conjuring universe back on track after Annabelle's failures, and it did exactly that. James Wan was back directing, and for all the same reasons the first Conjuring worked, this sequel did too. The direction was purposeful, Patrick Wilson and Farrah Farmiga were magnetic as always, there were great scare sequences, and you cared about the family due to the time invested in them. Patrick Wilson's guitar scene may be my favorite scene in any of these movies. This sequel matched the original, and it is not an unpopular opinion to like The Conjuring 2 just as much, if not more, than The Conjuring 1. The fourth movie in the universe was Annabelle Creation, directed by David F. Sandberg, the movie that would either be Annabelle's redemption or the final nail in her tiny coffin. Annabelle Creation had no right to be as good as it was. It was a prequel to a prequel spin off about a haunted doll. And yet, the Conjuring franchise continued its hot streak. David F. Sandberg squeezed every ounce of potential he could out of this story and crafted a really fun, scare heavy roller coaster ride with great set pieces and scares that was still able to have an impactful core relationship between two orphan girls. Annabelle Creation learned from Annabelle's failures, using Annabelle as a conduit for scarier, more active demons, rather than just have Annabelle sit in a rocking chair and stare blankly at audiences. At this point, I thought the Conjuring universe could do no wrong, that Annabelle would be the franchise's one and only mistake, that they had everything else figured out, and the next movies were guaranteed to be hits. And this, my friends, is where the wheels really began to fall off. Similar to Sandberg, Warner Brothers took a chance on two up-and-coming directors to helm the following two spin-offs. Unfortunately, these two movies didn't have nearly the same success. These next two are the lowest reviewed movies in the franchise, and it isn't particularly close. Valak, similar to Annabelle, was teased in The Conjuring 2, heavily hinted to audiences to have their own feature spin-off movie. We got this spin-off in the form of The Nun. I won't dive into The Nun in too great of depth. I've ranted about it in two other videos. I absolutely hate it. The Nun is painfully dull, jump scare heavy, and lacks any interesting characters. It is by far the worst movie in the Conjuring franchise. After The Nun came The Curse of La Llorona. This movie is more of the same, another sizable disappointment. While it had somewhat of an interesting idea behind it, it did not have an engaging story, there were too many hollow boo scares, and the only scene I remember is the one from the trailer where the car windows open. Really quickly, I also just want to say I'm not intending at all to put the blame on the directors. I genuinely enjoy some of their earlier work. Corin Hardy's The Hallow is a fantastic creative horror movie. He is extremely talented. There are reasons beyond a director as to why a movie doesn't work. The scripts for these two movies did not do them any favors. Also, considering the whole Zack Snyder versus Warner Brothers fiasco, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if there was increased studio interference by Warner Brothers in these last two movies. Anyways, the seventh movie in this franchise was Annabelle Comes Home. This movie continued the theme of me being shocked by how much I enjoy Annabelle spin-offs. I thought this would be worse than the last two, but it's without a doubt my fourth favorite film in the franchise. It has a fun babysitter left alone in a haunted house premise. It doesn't take itself too seriously, the characters are quite likable, it moves at a quick pace, and the haunted house format allows for the group of four to get separated and each face off with a cavalcade of different and unique ghosts. I had an absolute blast watching this. This is the exact type of spin-off I want to counter the more serious Conjuring films. Finally, this month we got the eighth movie in the universe, The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It, or The Conjuring 3 for short. I had low expectations going into this. My main concern was the fact that James Wan wasn't bothering to return for the third movie in his trilogy. I'm a big fan of his work. Wan is a modern horror legend, and unfortunately, any other director helming this movie had gigantic shoes to fill. My second and larger concern for this movie was the source material. The Conjuring universe has gotten flack in the past for glorifying the real-life Warrens, which is a topic I won't dive into in this video. In short, a lot of people believe the Warrens are manipulative con artists, including the real families these movies are based on. Even the family from Conjuring 3 have called the Warrens liars. I haven't minded the based on a true story gimmick too much in the past, but I found the premise for this third movie to be disgusting. The Devil Made Me Do It was based on the real-life murder of a real man. Throughout the entire movie, the murderer is portrayed as innocent and sympathetic, a victim of circumstance. The living friends and relatives of the man who was murdered now have to see trailers and billboards glorifying and defending the person who killed their loved one. It is shameful to make this movie, to exploit this crime for based on a true story marketing purposes and profit off of it. And even if I ignore all that somehow, if I pretend that this movie is about a made-up murder trial, The Conjuring 3 is still not good. In the past, the Conjuring movies were the golden goose of the franchise, the movies you could rely on if all the other spin-offs failed. But The Conjuring 2 is just an inferior copycat of the other two. Yeah, sure, Patrick Wilson and Farrah Farmiga are as charismatic as ever. They always are, and they always will be. They would make Sharknado 7 seem like a better movie just by being there. But as a whole, if you judge this movie individually based on its own merits, the story is toilet paper thin, the villain is underdeveloped and inconsequential, there are no likable characters besides the Warrens, it's painfully boring, it lacks memorable scares and creativity, the corny dialogue will make you wince, it fails to establish an effective atmosphere, it has no heart, and it repeats all the same beats from earlier movies, especially towards the end. This may not be the worst movie in the franchise, hell, it's technically probably somewhere between 4th and 7th based on personal preference, but for me, this is the low point. Circling back to the main question of this video, what has gone wrong? Why have the audience and critic reviews continued to decrease, especially in the past 5 years? What is causing the decline of the Conjuring franchise? Is the issue audience fatigue? I don't think so. We only get one of these movies a year, and they're still making more money than ever. The Nun, the worst reviewed movie, made over $300 million at the box office. Audiences are giving these new movies bad reviews, but they're still eager to line up and see the next Conjuring movie when it comes out. Well, then, is the issue unoriginal premises? Again, not really. The first Conjuring movie is the most basic haunted house premise ever, and it's excellent. Some of the best movies in this franchise are prequel spin-off sequels about an evil doll. The Nun has an interesting premise on paper, but in execution it doesn't work. La Llorona is a great piece of folklore to cover and could have been great. If anything, this franchise has shown that it can make bad premises great and great premises bad. In my eyes, the biggest issue with the Conjuring universe right now is that it is straying too far away from what made the first movie great. Even though The Nun, La Llorona, and Conjuring 3 featured some of the same story elements, the Warrens, an investigation, a demonic possession, jump scares, a family in peril, they failed to capture the same magic. These movies come off as cheap imitations, an inferior cover band playing a classic slightly out of tune. That's not to say I want the first movie again and again and again. I'm all for bringing in new directors with new visions. I liked what Sandberg and Doberman did with their installments. I don't need the same haunted house setting, I don't need the Warrens in every movie as much as I enjoy the actors. I'm open to a diverse Conjuring universe. Whether the next movie is Conjuring 4, Annabelle Strikes Back, or an underwater World War II werewolf movie, I don't care. The issue is not that these later movies didn't repeat the same story beats. It's that they didn't have the same core fundamentals of the first Conjuring movie, of any good horror movie. The later sequels lack impressive, memorable scare sequences, tightly constructed narratives, likable characters, creativity, purpose, and a strong emotional core. Going back and looking at these 8 movies, those are the common threads that tie the best movies together, and what the worst of the bunch were missing. At this point, the Conjuring movies are piggybacking off the goodwill built up from earlier Conjuring movies. Audiences, myself included, will see any Conjuring movie no matter what they thought of the last few. I'm not saying if you like Conjuring 3 or Curse of La Llorona you're wrong. There are some aspects in each that did work, and I absolutely understand people liking these certain movies more than me. I already know, given the subject of this video, I'll get angry comments from people who love a movie I disliked, dislike a movie I did like, or think I'm just being too critical because I simply want to hate on these movies. The reason I made this video is not because I want to hate on the Conjuring franchise, because I want it to fail to validate my own opinions. It'll continue to make billions of dollars no matter what I think. The purpose of this video is to put into words my disappointment with the last few movies, to point out a concerning trend that is backed by other audience member reviews. I want these movies to be better. I love the Conjuring verse. These movies are among my favorites of the last decade, and some of the best theater experiences I've had. Going forward, I hope the graph looks like this. I would love nothing more than for the next 4 Conjuring sequels to be great. I'd be ecstatic if that happened. So please, save us, Crooked Man. You are our only hope. That is my discussion of the Conjuring universe, the declining reviews, and what I believe to be the main issues. Let me know your opinions on this topic, which Conjuring movies you like, dislike, or whether you agree or disagree with any of my overall points. If you stumbled upon this video, please consider subscribing to my channel, Flicks with Nick. I post new horror rants, commentaries, and deep dives on Fridays. As well, on Mondays, I post quick 1-minute recommendations for horror movies available to watch on Shudder, Netflix, and Amazon Prime. Thank you for all the recent support for my channel, and thank you for watching this video. I will see you in the next one.